Okay. Uh, Hi and welcome to this special YouTube live with uh, Kenneth Serrao and me, Ankit Doshi, on the budget. A lot of people seem to be following the union budget. If you are an avid follower of financial news channels, you would believe that there is nothing more important than the budget in the world during these months, January and February. And if you look at the financial markets for the last 3 days, um, you would believe as if the government is opened up a can of goodies for everybody in a way that we've never seen in a while. So um, I don't know what's happening, and you know, been following the budget and the markets for many years. As somebody in a Gujarati household with somebody who was a stockbroker. And I also know that Ken has been following the budgets and the markets for almost 2 decades now. And I often believe, or I often felt that, what's the big deal about the budget? Why is it that everybody gives it so much importance? And which is why we thought we should do a session on, you know, um is the budget actually overhyped, or does it require the kind of attention and news and involvement that it gets? Or is it something that only people in the English speaking circles make a lot of deal about and actually nobody on the road really cares? And to talk about this, I have Kenneth Serrao with me. Ken, as you would, a lot of you who follow our channel and know the Inside IIM community know him pretty well. He's an IIM Ahmedabad alumnus in the class of 2000. He is one of the co-founders of Oaks Asset Management. He's used to work with a lot of financial services firms all throughout his life. Although he started his career as a consultant in the US with I2 Consulting, he then moved to Kotak, then he moved to Edelweiss, then he started his own company, brokerspleaseexcuse.com, sold it to Edelweiss Real Estate, and since then he's been working with Oaks with some fantastic people. So welcome, Ken. How are you feeling? You are in Mangalore. How's life?
Life's the same, pre and post budget. Let's start there. But obviously, you know, we in financial markets, all of us pay a little bit more attention to budgets, as you said, uh, for two reasons. One is, of course, at a very short-term level, budgets often can have very dramatic, expressions in the stock markets. Uh, you know, budgets are an important event, both on the upside and the downside. So obviously, being in financial markets in any form and fashion, the budget becomes mainstream for at least one day of your life. It's the most important thing, right? I'm completely off TV, but on the day of the budget, you want your computer free, you want your mobile phones free, and so I also commandeered the TV in my house and actually watched it the good old-fashioned way on CNBC. Uh, but yeah, going back to the point that you raised, Ankit, you know, budgets are really the key driver, of most economies, and especially an economy that's as centrally controlled as the Indian economy. Uh, you know, one is of course, the stock market part of it, but like you said, the stock markets impact less than 2-3% of the people in India. But the other thing really is that, you know, budgets are uh, what is the budget? A budget is basically the allocation that a government is making for the year to, very, very different, how much is it going to go out and spend on different sectors, how much is it allocating to different things, what is the focus of the government. Finally, you got to put your money where your mouth is, right? So I can say, for example, in my own personal life, I can say, oh, I really care about health. But if I'm not going to go out and spend on health, if I'm not going to go out and spend on nutritious food, how is that going to happen, right? I can say I care about education, and I'll have to go and figure out how to spend time and money in order to get a good education for myself or for my family. So budgets really determine, what the government is focused on, because it's where the government is putting its money. It can say whatever it wants, but really where a government allocates its money is really where a government's focus is. And, I just see the first question come in, which is, what does Capex do? And it's a great question to begin, right? We are all hearing that this is a Capex intensive budget. There is, a very, very large number of 5 lakh odd crores. It's an incomprehensible number, right? It's a large number that's been allocated to building what is called Capex. What is Capex? Capex is really infrastructure, right? Capex is roads, ports, things that make. Why do we need a government? Let's just step back to why do we need a government in the first place? Why can't everything be private? The reason everything in life cannot be private is because there is always going to be some stuff that needs to be done in order to enable everything else to happen. So, the two extreme models of the world in this respect are, one is a complete capitalist model where you say, sab kuch khol do, market forces will do whatever. But even in the center of capitalism, which is the United States, you see that the government plays a very big role, right? Because there is a lot of stuff that essentially private companies will never do. Stuff that don't have immediate returns or medium-term returns, but have huge long-term returns. An example of this is a road, right? You can go to some of the best malls in India, and you see that the roads outside them are not made. Some of the most expensive malls in India, they will do everything possible inside, but they'll say outside, this is not my problem. That's the government's problem, right? It's education. A private sector will say, I will employ the best, I will employ the most educated, but it will never ever invest in the schools and colleges that are required in order to bring the best and train them in the best possible means and make them employable, right? A lot of people today, all the youth in India, a lot of whom will be watching this channel, they're looking for jobs. And what are they looking for jobs in? They're looking for jobs in the private sector. But the single largest employer in India is the government of India, right? And hence, there were all these memes floating around yesterday, and one of them was, about this one saying, "Oh, all my life I've been looking for a government job, and now you're going to tell me that, I'm going to privatize it." So imagine a guy who's like bribed people or done a whole bunch of things to get a government PSU job, and now the PSU itself is getting privatized, right?
But that's so. Can let me just stop you there,
sure.
Because so I understand. So keeping with the topic of expenditure, and there have been a lot of questions also on the expenditure. Just want to give you guys, set some context here. So the Indian government is saying that in the coming financial year, and in India the financial year starts from April 1st. The government is going to spend 34.8 lakh crore rupees. That is money that the government will be essentially giving out to people, either in the form of salaries to employees or in the form of Capex, as Ken was saying. Right now, what is like, to make some sense of this number, 34.8 lakh crores, that's close to $480 billion. Just the amount of money that India is going to spend in the next 1 year is twice the GDP of Pakistan. It's and I don't want to jargonize this too much, but typically what ends up happening is that if you look at all the best most industrialized countries in the world, the percentage of government expenditure as a percentage of the GDP is typically higher. So for example, if you look at the European Union, almost 44% of the European Union GDP consists of expenditure that is made by the government itself, because it's a more evolved industrialized society. They spend a lot of money on social security. Even a country like the United States of America, that amount is close to 37% of the total GDP. And for context, the US GDP is 10 times that of India's, and India's GDP is 10 times that of a country like Pakistan, or about 8 times that of a country like Bangladesh. And the government spending that kind of money is supposed to have a multiplier effect on the economy. So my question was, when you say that government needs to spend, and the government needs to spend on health, on education, before we come to topics like privatization, why is it, or defense, right? So why is it that so they say that if the government spends $1 in the economy, it typically and if it's a quality spending that is done by the government, then it could lead to a multiplier effect, and there could be $3 or $4 created in the economy, in the GDP, because of that. So why do people stress so much on? And of course, there are two schools of thought here. There is no one way that is right, but what we've seen since the World War II is that majority of the countries that have done well in the world have typically relatively high amount of government expenditure, and they obviously have spent quality money. So countries like Japan, the US, the European Union, etc., they've spent on good creation of good quality infrastructure, and ensured that the quality of life of their citizens has gone up. Why is this so important, and why is it important for you and me that the government spends money? Why should it matter to me, how much money the government is spending?
So I think also looking at a few of the questions that are just, I think the two, three broad parts. One is, of course, the whole stock market impact that some people are asking about. And, some part of your question is, why is the stock market so excited about it? The second is, why is it important? Let's just go back to your first part, which is the multiplier bit, right? Let's look at anybody who went to a good quality college, and let's look at that as an investment that their parents made in their future, right? That is a classic example, right? If you look at a lot of very poor people in India, they're not able to afford education, right? And then you have, the middle class and the upper middle class in India, where people focus on educating their children, often at great personal hardship, etc. And what are they doing really? They're doing something that is very illogical, because they're basically going and investing what they've saved for their entire life into their children's future.
Right.
And that effectively, every rupee that you spend comes back as a force multiplier, as a multiplier effect in that kid, and hopefully through the kid into your own family's, financial fortunes over the next 20 years. And that is a classic example of an infrastructure spend that we all can understand, on an immediate basis, that we spend on quality education, and that education comes back to us by way of a better job down the line, by way of better prospects, by way of better decision making, better investing, and all of those things that pay back over the next 20 years. And exactly why, when the government makes an investment into education or nutrition or defense or roads, a lot of times people say that the impact that a village that has by just a simple electrical line reaching that village is immeasurable, right? The current government in its previous term focused a lot on electrification of India. And
right.
To us, sitting in the villages, in the cities, it's unimaginable, right? We pretty much live with 24/7 power. But imagine a village where electricity comes for the first time, right? Why did this government come back to power in such a big way? Because especially in rural India, if you've got a village where electricity has come to your village for the first time under a particular government, that's life-changing, right? It has impact, and it has, and now they're doing the same thing with water, for example, right? So, so many of our villages and so much of our country was really living in the dark ages where, there was no electricity, there was no regular line of water, people were filling water from a hand pump and queuing up. And just these basic things and what they can do to elevate the lifestyle of rural India is just unimaginable. Couple it with things like the internet, couple it with things like, simple things like having access to information on YouTube through a geo connection, and the human potential that can be unlocked is just unimaginable. And why Capex spend is so immensely exciting, I think why this budget is such a seminal one is just that because of COVID, it almost was like you had nothing to lose. And because you had nothing to lose, because fiscal deficit, which normally, people who are followers of the budget across years, etc., will know that people agonize over decimal places in the fiscal deficit, right? They say that the government, if it earns 100 rupees and spends 103.2 rupees, which means our fiscal deficit is 3.2 rupees, which it has to finance by borrowing from international guys, etc. 3.2 going to 3.4 or 3.2 improving to 3 is normally a big deal.
Yeah.
What happened in this year was that all these things like fiscal deficit became irrelevant.
Right.
Because for the current year, the government suddenly went from a targeted deficit of 3.5% to 9.5% or somewhere thereabouts, upwards of 9%, right? And once you're at 9%, then it's immensely liberating because you're not worrying about the second decimal place of fiscal deficit. You've gone from 3 to 9, and now for the next year, you're like, let's go to 6.5%, which is a huge improvement from 9, but obviously significantly stepped up from 3% deficit, which we are used to, 2, 3%, 4%, which we have historically been used to in India. And where the government's got lucky is that, because we've developed our own vaccines and we have access to vaccines at relatively low cost, because COVID itself has by and large rushed through India without any significant fatalities compared to what we feared could have happened. Because so much of India was so basic that we sprang back to basic consumption immediately, and we expect next year to be a significant growth year from this year. And because of all this, the government didn't have to allocate a whole lot towards the one line item of COVID, and could still go to 6% deficit and do unprecedented spending in things like roads, in things like nutrition, in things like education. It's a major step up for India. It's almost like getting into a great college, for a middle class kid, because it's changing it's changing the future life trajectory of the entire family almost. So why this budget has been so exciting?
Also lower oil prices, right? I mean, just adding to one more thing, that lower oil prices also aid you to, not have a large fiscal deficit number.
No, absolutely. In fact, the budget has just been the culmination of something that's been building for the whole of last year, right? So all through the last year, you had a whole bunch of forces. You almost had India landing up in the perfect storm, right? You have the world looking for an alternative to China. For whatever it is worth, people are concerned about China now in a way that they have never been down the years. For whatever it is worth, you have, people worried about just their dependence on one single country in the world as a supply chain supplier, right? At the same time, you have Indian companies coming off scale, especially in pharma, where India is truly competitive with China, even pre-COVID, right? There are a few sectors where we are genuinely competitive. One is pharma, the other is, two-wheelers, automobile ancillaries. There are a few sectors where we are genuinely world-class competitive. Pharma just happens to be one of them, and that obviously got India great leverage and press in the international market. What it also did was that, along with this whole desire to look for an alternative to China, India itself, because of many different reasons historically, unlike China, unlike Vietnam, unlike Cambodia, unlike a lot of countries in the world, India has never been a major exporter. It's been a weakness. It's been something we wanted to develop. But the flip side of that is that we were only dependent on our domestic demand. So in a scenario where every country is going to look after their own interests and is worrying about how much they want to do themselves, India is really, on a relative basis, not impacted all that much, because we largely supply to our own domestic markets. The oil price thing that you were talking about, right? Again, the one significant import that India has is oil. And at least for the year gone by, with most of the countries sitting at home for most of the part, oil consumption was at an all-time low, which meant our oil deficit, our deficit due to importing oil was also helped immensely. Oil prices themselves fell because of demand, and that fall in oil prices, the government wisely decided not to pass those low prices on and use it, because that was the one place that they were really earning from, right? And that's almost an invisible tax. A higher oil price means that the cost of your vegetables, instead of 40 rupees, might be 42 rupees. And you'll almost not, it won't even be that much. Instead of 40 rupees a kilo, it will be 40.2 rupees a kilo. It's not going to be felt at all. So is the best way for the government to kind of make this money without really causing any kind of impact or without people feeling it, because oil consumption apart in commercial usage, oil consumption is just so well distributed, and domestic usage, nobody was driving around anyway. So a whole bunch of things just came together this year, which culminated in that moment in the budget. And somebody asked, is really the biggest benefit of the budget of thing that they didn't do anything silly? And yes, I think, Ankit, you and I were chatting about it yesterday. To me, this budget is really like a pure early Sachin Tendulkar innings, right? It's got nothing special. It's the perfect cover drive, the perfect straight drive, the perfect back foot. Every stroke is just perfect and correct. And this budget is exactly like that. It's perfect and it's correct without having any gimmicks. There's nothing special. There is no new invention. And I think people are celebrating that. This government has been historically over the last 5-6 years in the budget, there have been some missteps. Execution has not been at A1 plus, and I think that expectation being low also led to people being very, very surprised by a very high quality budget. And I think some part of it is, credit where credit is due to the current government. Some part of it is also just the freedom of knowing that you have nothing to lose. And when you have nothing to lose, it's just we saw it in the India-Australia series. You can do magnificent things when you have nothing to lose, and we saw that in the budget also. There was no COVID tax. There was no ridiculous, imposition on cigarettes, and no easy way out. It was just the right thing to do. Saying, okay, we'll bite the bullet. We'll have a little higher fiscal deficit. We'll invest in India, and that will. It's also a huge expression of faith, right? That, like you said, a rupee well invested will and they're confident, and that's the positivism of the whole world is sitting up and taking notice of out of this budget.
Okay, so Ken, let me stop you there. Views obviously a lot of questions which are also connected to the stock market. So, the question is, why is the stock market so excited about the budget always, and especially this year? We've seen almost a 10% move in the stock market over the last 3 days, and also some people are saying that the stock markets only matter to the elite Indians, and if the budget is for everybody in India, then why is it that the stock market gets more excited about it? Only a small group of people seem to be super excited this time. Foreign investors have bought close to 6,000-7,000 crores of Indian stock in the last couple of days. So what's going on, and why the excitement, according to you?
So I don't think foreign investors have only bought over the last 3 days. If you look at pretty much since COVID has begun, and after it was clear that India is kind of going to be reasonably well placed out of it, for the last 5, 6, 7 months in a row, India has been among the highest recipients of foreign investment. So, post-budget might be looking at it a little bit more keenly, but the fact is that over the last 6, 7 months, in fact, in FY20, India is one of the highest recipients of investment dollars across the globe and definitely across Asia, in absolute terms and in percentage terms. In percentage terms, it's not surprising, but in absolute, it's a statement because it's a large economy by itself. It's not a very large stock market by itself. So, like I said, post-budget is only a continuation of what has been happening for a while. And it's again the same kind of things, right? The budget has not taken away from any of what was building up, right? So the whole enabling of manufacturing and make in India for many, many sectors has now become a reality, right? There are enough and more multipliers and carrots and sticks that the government is putting in place to ensure that a lot more manufacturing, especially of the domestic market, comes to India, right? Today, you might be aware that iPhones are being manufactured in India. This would be unthinkable 5 years ago or 10 years ago. right? The government put it down as a law. Companies came and invested. Government offered some sobs. But it's a huge statement when you see iPhones that say "Made in India" at the back, right?
Yeah.
The government is also engaging in direct dialogue with a number of companies. In fact, it's not just at the Apple, Samsung level. We are investors in mid and small and medium-sized companies. And one of the companies that we've looked at, they basically make headphones and connected wearables, and really small, right? 300, 400 crores kind of top line. And even them, they are seeing that Mighty is engaging directly with them and talking and saying, what do you need in order for you not to import from China, but to make in India or work with Indian manufacturers?
Right.
We're seeing in electric scooters, we're seeing the government being very, very encouraging and saying, what is it that we can do? Along with putting a stick on the table saying that, you better do this because in some time from now, duties will go up, and in some time from now, imports will not be allowed. So it's not a knee-jerk kind of thing saying do this from tomorrow. It's a measured 2, 3, 4 year approach, and that's kind of coming. You're seeing it in stocks like Dixon Technologies, Amber. They're
Yeah.
just seeing incredible tailwinds to the whole manufacturing in India, which honestly, 10 years ago, if you asked me, I would have said, India is never going to be able to manufacture because we just don't have the mindset, the capital, the space, the government encouragement that's required in order to do this. A lot of people don't realize that it's not just that Chinese entrepreneurs are better than Indian entrepreneurs. It's that the Chinese government creates an environment that makes it so simple and easy to manufacture, to pack, to ship, to export, and to essentially, work on being the manufacturer to the world that China has become. And what we are seeing now is enough initiatives from the government side in directly engaging with every level of companies, and of course in this budget, in enabling things that will make this happen. Developing state capacity capability. We talked about privatization, Ankit.
Yeah.
The government is saying it's not. I'll be a great referee. I'll set the rules. I'll say this is what you need to do. This is what you want to do, and this is what we want you to do. But I don't need to do it myself. I don't need to get into manufacturing TVs, and I don't need to get into manufacturing, X-ray machines, and I don't need to get into manufacturing chips. All of this stuff people will do far better, and I think that's the one big one that people are excited about out of this budget. The fact that the government explicitly stating that it's not just that they will disinvest, but they're saying that we'll get out of several sectors. We'll just stop doing this and let people do this better. It is a very, very significant nod to, the quality of private enterprise in India and the quality of work that is being done by, actually, if you think about it, in sector, after decades of government being around, the private sector has come and significantly improved efficiency, significantly improved delivery to consumers, and really, wherever, except where it is of strategic importance and except where it is of a level that is multi-year and hence not possible for private sector to invest in. In most other sectors, they should just let go and let private sector kind of invest and do what they do best.
Yeah. I mean, I
So that,
guess. Yeah, I guess
yeah.
if you look at a sector like telecom, it's one of the biggest success stories. If the government was to continue to do telecom on their own and not have allowed private players to participate, we would never have gotten the kind of penetration and adoption of mobile technology in India. If the government was the only one that was trying to do that, for sure. Because I remember there was a time when there was a waiting list for getting an MTNL phone to your household. There was a waiting list to actually even get a Bajaj scooter, I remember.
And
But
you and I aren't even that old. And you
and
and
we
I
aren't
aren't even
that
that
old.
old. I mean, we're not even talking about 1960s, right? We're talking about the 90s.
Correct.
So that's true.
Yeah. So Ken, just going to before we
No,
go
and I
into
think,
audience, sorry, before we go into audience questions, want to switch the tone a little because we have a lot of people who are joined in who are students, and wanted to ask you, if you were going to interview people, and one of the things that we've seen is whether it is IIM interviews, whether it is interviews for UPSC, whether it is interviews for people trying to apply for jobs for their final placements in either B school or anywhere else, or if there is a job which is connected to finance, marketing, the economy. Typically around this time, people ask a lot of questions around the budget, right? And we also at Inside IIM make lots of budget notes that students can refer to when they go for interviews. Now, I wanted to actually understand from you, as somebody who interviews people regularly. You, I think, over your career interviewed hundreds of candidates at various levels. So what would be the questions that you would ask somebody about the budget? We obviously established in this conversation that the budget makes a lot of it matters a lot, and it's a big deal. And you've obviously spoken a lot about why it's a big deal. Now, as a student or a professional wanting to interview, what would you ask that person? What kind of technical knowledge would you expect that person to know? What basics would you expect that person to know? What are the questions that you would ask? Not pertaining to just this budget, but in general, when there's a question around budgets.
No, I think definitely, but especially in finance roles, especially in interviews, even for IIM interviews, admissions, you would expect people to have a basic level of awareness, and the budget being what it is, you definitely expect people to have a lot of awareness. Some part of it is contextual. So if it's a CA that I'm interviewing, then I'll have a slightly higher bar for information than if it is an MBA, or than if it is like an engineer. I wouldn't expect all of them to be at the same level of knowledge, but certainly I think some of the basics I would expect people to know are at least the context and broad size and numbers of what the government budget is about, right? So at least high level numbers of allocation to what are the big things that the government is allocated to. If there is what are the highlights of a typical question if I was interviewing you would be to ask you what are the highlights of the union budget this year, right? And when you're answering that, I would expect you to know what are the pillars on which the government has allocated a lot more money this year versus last year. One of the highlights this year would be just the fact that a 6.5% fiscal deficit, which has never happened in India by plan for the last 20 odd years, would be a highlight. And then that money was taken and actually put into Capex, allocated to Capex at levels and numbers the size of which India has not seen even in any 3-4 years put together. So I would expect if you are a CA to know a little bit more, because a budget is really a balance sheet of the government, right? So the government's putting together a P&L and a balance sheet for the year. And as a CA, I would expect you to know a little bit more technical, what is the deficit, where is the deficit being going into, where is the income of the government coming from or expected to come from, but even otherwise, it would be, if you're not a CA or if you're not financially, technically advanced, then I would expect you to know what are the big allocation points, what are the big talking points around this year's budget, just have a, more importantly, have a point of view around it. I would expect people to have read enough about it to have a point of view around what makes this budget separate or good or bad, right? So
but Ken, with respect to, say, the fiscal deficit, now suppose if someone were to ask a question, is fiscal deficit a good thing or a bad thing? Typically, you would say that spending more than you earn is supposed to be bad, right? You would typically advise people to only spend as much as you can potentially earn. So if we are going to 9.5%, and then if we are going to glide to 6.8%, and then come back to 4.5% in 5 years. So if I'm a student, how should I answer that question? Because contextually, you could argue that it does not matter if right now you're spending a little more. But philosophically, is it a good thing or a bad thing to have a fiscal deficit? How would you answer something like that?
So I think very simply put, it's no different than if you ask me, should I take a loan? I would ask you, what do you want to take a loan for? And if you say I want to take a loan, I want to take a personal loan in order to take my boyfriend out for a movie on his birthday, I'd say it's a bad thing. But if you were to say that I want I want to take a loan because I want to go attend college, I've got admission to, I'm co-code, and my parents can't afford the fees, and I want to, take a loan, an education loan to do that. Then I would say by all means you should do that, because that rupee is going to pay itself back far more
Right.
post the MBA. So I think the answer to that is really, some part of it will only be known because it comes down to your belief and faith in the government's ability. If the government is able to execute and invest this money that it's borrowing today wisely, and if the moment is right for India, then I think this will prove to be game changing. On the other hand, if they whittle it away and invest it either poorly, or there's a lot of corruption, and this money that's invested doesn't pay adequate dividends, then it will prove to be, equally damaging, because it could lead to really a destabilization of the economy, potentially, weakening of the Indian rupee, etc. So it really comes down to that. What are you borrowing for? And at least the initial reaction, if the government says does even a half of what they have said they will do in the budget, then I think it'll be quite incredible. It'll be game changing for India, right? If you look at the kilometers of roads that they want to build, if you look at the focus on nutrition, mission portion, I think they called it. India is really a malnourished country, and so the unlocking of potential of lives in rural India. Somewhere I saw a question saying, "What is it? What is in it for rural India?" And I think, at least for this government, there's nothing but rural India that's squarely the center and focus. So, nutrition, water, electricity, these things we don't appreciate, but these are game changing for people, right? We talked about they talked about putting gas pipelines into every home in so many different cities, things like that. Just waiting in black market. Even to this day, you and I, SPCL comes and delivers a gas cylinder perfectly well to us. But to this day, gas cylinders basically are sold in black through the length and breadth of India, because people don't have, simple things like ration cards. They talked about one nation, one ration card being implemented with greater, most migrant labor. You and I, Ankit, saw what happened across the streets of Mumbai
Correct.
during the lockdown. Migrant labor sitting without any kind of documentation. One nation, one ration card is just such a big game changer. If you can access the public distribution service, there's so much food rotting away because people with the right ration cards aren't turning up to collect it. So I think a lot of the stuff that they've talked about are really seminal. And if they implement even half or three-quarters of what they've talked about, I think India will be a changed country. Right?
So that's what I wanted to get to, as one of our users also pointed that out, that it's all good to put out intentions. Essentially, what you do in a budget is you put out your intention that I want to spend money on XYZ things. But eventually it matters, what the execution is like. And if obviously they don't execute, then all this jump in the stock market or the optimism that a lot of economists and other commentators are giving may not be truly justified. But I guess you have to just believe in the Indian system working, and then, like you said, some percentage of this will definitely be implemented, is what we can hope for.
No, exactly. I think there's two different parts to it, right? One is कि Excel sheet पे नहीं डाला, दूसरा है Excel sheet पे डाला और उसके बाद क्या होएगा? So
Right.
At least Excel sheet पे डाल दिया अभी, right? So
Right.
if once you have allocated to education, once you're allocated to hospitals, when you're allocated to roads, once you're allocated to defense, at least that allocation is there. Now your question is, of course, will we execute, sensibly? Will we do a good job of it later? And we'll know in due course of time. But sitting at the moment where you are, you can't sit with the glass half empty and say कि हाँ ये तो बोल दिया लेकिन इंडिया में तो कोई कुछ कभी होता नहीं है. So at least this government has shown that they're able to do a bunch of things. Some of the results, let's not even talk about electrification. ना मैं गाँव गया हूँ ना आप गाँव गए हो. So let's not talk about electrification and jal, and let's just take those numbers at face value. Let's look at something like GST, right? look at the numbers of GST for month on month on month on month. When GST was implemented 2-3 years ago, people were like, "Oh, this is going to be causing so much problems," and yes, it did have a lot of teething problems, etc. But now, if you look at it, what was like we used to celebrate 1 lakh crores of monthly collection in GST. Now, we do that regularly. Now, 120 is the new 1 lakh crores. These are huge
Correct.
numbers. You talked about Pakistan. These are bigger than the GDP of India was 20 years ago. These are
Correct.
huge numbers that the government is collecting in taxes. And now that the government has money, it will be able to do things. जब government के पास पैसे ही नहीं था, तो how would the government be able to spend when it didn't have any money in its pocket?
Correct.
Uh, and the other thing is read the papers, right? Every second day you read of some other GST fraud being caught in some part of the other of the country. Somewhere they've got 180 crores, somewhere they've got 120 crores. The fact is that now there is a system that gives the government so much data that the government is really not able to process it. It's just a matter of time now that these webs process it, and it becomes fairly difficult for people to do at least large scale GST fraud, for people to do. And that's the other thing, right? Like the whole focus on reducing income tax cases from 7 years to 3 years, on making it simpler for people to file income tax. Like a lot of this is really, huge steps in easing life for people, especially on the business side, that really will allow people. People have just said, Indian businessmen will find a way to do whatever. Just get out of our way. Make it simple. Give us the opportunity, and baki hum log kar denge. And I think this government is just indicated through this budget that they are very keen to do that and get out of the way, which is what the excitement is over.
Okay. So the next question I want to take is from Tanmay Sahu. And he's saying, is inflation coming soon? And how will the government pay off its debt if it is going to raise from the market, or maybe it's going to print more notes by speaking to the RBI? Do you think that there's going to be inflation? And I guess that's a question you could apply to even globally, because even the US Federal Reserve is committed to keeping rates low and printing as much money as necessary to bring the economy out of this funk, stimulate it so that people have money in their hands. So what do you think about this, Ken? I mean, I know you're not an economist, but what is your general sense about this? That typically, if the supply of something goes up in a market, then wouldn't that lead to inflation? So Tanmay's question is quite relevant that way.
No, I think it's not even $1 million question. It's a multi-billion, trillion, gazillion dollar question to quote Austin Powers, right? I wish I knew the answer. I can but hazard a guess and an opinion. But my opinion on this is just that, I think there are two very, very conflicting forces at play. One side is, of course, the whole money printing and, and hence in the whole great big, race among nations, to coin a term, a lot of it is not relevant what your absolute position is. It's really more important what your relative position is, right? So I'm okay to borrow so long as, the competing economy is borrowing more than me. Because
Right.
what people really want is to believe in, the international dollar is going to flow somewhere. It's got to flow to wherever it believes there is stability, wherever it believes there is growth. And hence it's a balancing act, right? You can't destroy your economy in order to be prudent. And at the same time, you can't borrow so much that you become a Zimbabwe or an Argentina and your rupee gets devalued. So,
Right.
so it's a very, very tough balancing act. And it's a balancing act that governments have to play in order to kind of retain the confidence of global markets. And at least on the face of the initial reaction, you haven't seen any adverse effect. And so I think they've done a very good job. A lot of this is just words. People may find it hard to believe, but it's not maths, it's words, it's tone, it's body language, right? It's how the Fed Reserve says something that's as important as what it says. It's
Right.
how the finance minister said something that's as important as what was said, right? So yes, the world recognizes that India will have a little bit more of a fiscal deficit than it has. But the fact is that the US has many, many more times. It's not even by percentage points. It's many, many more times that their fiscal deficit has exploded. So people are okay, I guess, in a post-COVID world to allow governments to borrow a little bit more, so long as that borrowing is going towards actually doing things that will, make this country, make that country go that much further. And keep in mind that on one side is money printing, right? But on the other side, there is a completely
Hello.
deflationary force, which is just demand destruction, right? At the end of the day, demand is not going to be there. How are you going to be able to increase prices? Let's look at the example of oil, right? Uh, in the last 1 year, for all the money printing that's happened, oil pretty much went into negative territory at one point in time because it was perceived that there just would be no demand, right? There was a time not more than 10, 12 years ago that we believed that we would hit peak oil, 2006, 2007. If you throw your mind back to, we believed that the world would run out of oil at some point, and oil was going mental. Went to $150 at that point of time because people believed that that oil is something that will, basically the world will run out of. Today we've come to the other extreme where, it is now clear that even at current pace, at the pace at which renewables and solar are growing, we will never run out of oil. It is now almost clear that, you know, the pace, our annual consumption and the current storage of stores of oil that the planet has, we have at least 150 years more to go. And if we have 150 more years to go, by that time, I think solar, we are fairly confident, will be tapped enough that we'll, this will only go down. Even our current consumption of oil will only go down as we go further along. So I think, I'm not overly concerned about inflation. Uh, I think in India in particular, there's also the huge deflationary force of technology, right? So today, what's also happening is that the cost of so many things is just coming down because technology is making delivery more and more seamless, cheaper, easier, and that has a huge deflationary cost on everything. Like look at the fact that you know Zoom is pretty much probably just as one single piece of software. Zoom plus a new mindset post COVID means that many organizations will never go back to the office capacity that they were at, right? E-commerce, the explosion in e-commerce that happened this year, when people have been forced to use e-commerce platforms, even if they may not have liked to do so previously, and will continue to use e-commerce platforms. Just the deflationary effect of both of these things on office space, on commercial space, on retail is immense. So I think that there are enough cases that you can make both ways, and it's not as simple as saying just because a lot of money is being printed, it'll result in runaway inflation. In fact, I would think in India we'd be fairly okay because a lot of demand destructions really happen, and as it comes back, we're very well placed, and so much demand is so basic that I don't anticipate there being runaway inflation at all.
Got it. I think there we have Rishi, who is worried that India is rated triple B minus in credit ratings, um, and tax buoyancy also. I don't know. He says it seems that it is fudged. Do you feel that India is producing fudged data, and hence, maybe credit rating agencies don't take us seriously and rate us so low? Um, what do you think of that? Does it affect India's credibility, and the fact that India's rating is low? And I guess a higher fiscal deficit does not really help matters in that sense. And I think there is a big debate going on around this bit about how much should India worry about credit rating agencies. Like my own personal belief is that India shouldn't really worry about it too much, because ultimately we should take care of our citizens, and if that requires us to spend money, we should spend money. But then obviously that leads to higher borrowing costs for India and Indian companies everywhere. But obviously, again, the stock markets are pointing to something different. So again, what do you think about this question that Rishi has asked around credit rating agencies probably downgrading us, and maybe our data is also fudged according to him?
No, I think two, three separate comments
Question.
and observations there. I think the first is that I won't take stock markets and their response as anything being right or wrong, right? Stock markets
Right.
tomorrow could go into decline. So just that last comment you made, I think, regardless, you got to have your own opinion, regardless of stock markets going up or down. And even if stock markets were down, I would still think that this budget is a good budget. But the second thing around fudge data, I think, as I said earlier, a lot of this is, relative. So, is data perfect? I don't think data is perfect, but I think India is among the most transparent data availability systems of any of the major countries for sure, except for maybe a couple of the absolute top of the line companies. But if you look at what we compete with for investment dollars, right? Brazil, Russia, China, I would say we have absolutely top-notch data compared to any of these, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
So I would not worry too much about the quality of our data. If anything, I would think that we are too transparent and share too much data, right? We just put everything out there, especially post Aadhaar. There's just way too much data. We don't have any firewall, unlike the Chinese. Google is open, Facebook is open. All our data, everything that you and I are talking is right now on YouTube in
Correct.
English. So I don't think by any means we put too much data out there. Google Pay is the largest financial transaction platform in the country right now, right? By sheer numbers. So
Correct.
what kind of fudging of data are we talking about? We're not talking about having to trust some fuddy-duddy old bank in saying that there are so many transactions. Google knows it directly, not just through Google searches. Google Pay is the single biggest transacting platform in the country. So what better data can you have than that? The same with Netflix, the same with Facebook. Everything is open. So I think if young people in India are making comments that say that Indian data is fudged, I would just tell them that. And why I'm not saying it's a bullshit statement is because I don't think perfect data is possible, right? Otherwise, I would have just said, this is a bullshit statement. But I think it is a fairly wrong impression if that's the impression and self-image that you carry. I think it's a very wrong impression to carry. I think the fact that our rating is low is just a function of the fact that we have such a emerging economy. Uh, you know, Things can easily spiral out of control in a country like India, and that is why our rating is low. It isn't a large monolithic, economy. It is a fast-growing, fast-changing economy, and hence things are by definition going to be unstable. The example I'll give you is probably one of, if you look at banking loans, right? You can give loans to all the AAA corporates that you want at 6.5%. But do you know which is the most profitable segment for every bank and every NBFC? It is unsecured credit, right?
Right.
So it's unsecured credit because the average Indian, who's borrowing at 12, 13, 15, 18% because he has poor credit, is concerned about improving his credit score, is concerned about borrowing more and more, and actually is paying back. I'm not just saying in the tens of years and the quarters and decades, I'm including in post-COVID, right?
Right.
The segment that's improved massively is actually personal loans, right?
Right.
Because the average Indian is concerned about his credit score because he knows that he's only borrowed 1 lakh rupees today, and tomorrow he'll have to borrow 10 lakh rupees, and day after tomorrow he'll have to borrow a crore, and hence he will repay back. So unsecured credit, which is basically loans given to Ankit Doshi or Kenneth Serrao without any assets backing it, is the best performing loan book for every bank, every NBFC.
Correct.
On the other hand, the blue chip, AAA corporates, etc., you end up with one big fraud a year that wipes off everything, right? And so, I would look at exactly the same. Just because you're poorly rated doesn't mean that things are bad. It's just a function of where you are. India is like the 20-year-old, 21-year-old who's young to credit, and hence is a poorer credit rating. That doesn't mean he's a poorer bet to take. And a lot of FII money is just kind of taking that bet, as we can see over the last year, decade, month, quarter, whatever period of time you take.
Right. Yeah, I hope that explains, Rishi. That was very well explained. So Ashita Agarwal has a question. I was waiting for one of these on the vaccines. So, what economic relief do you think can be expected because of the vaccines? And Ken, this is an interesting question in Indian context because cases in India have been going down. We are now in four-digit cases from the five-digit cases that we were seeing for almost 6 months. And a lot of people say that there is possibly herd immunity in India already. And we obviously have a massive vaccine rollout. There is a vaccine rollout going on across the world. Um, how do you think the availability of vaccines impacts the economy and obviously connected to the budget, because that was also spoken about a lot of times during the budget. So um, do you think India really requires vaccines? That could be one other question. um, we are vaccinating, I think, about 30-40 lakh people a day.
No, I think no, I think two things, Ankit. I think India is clearly about two Indias, right? So there is one India which is the top, I would say, 10 crore people who are as international and who are as concerned about everything,
Right.
and hence are almost staying at home. And unfortunately or fortunately, these are also the India that 90% of our economy caters to in terms of demand, right? A lot of demand just flows through from these people. People
Right.
work for these people, people deliver food to these people. So that top 10% of India really, that is at least still staying at home. And because they're staying at home, I think the only thing that they're looking for in order to get out of their houses is eventually comfort in taking a vaccine and eventually taking the vaccine. Uh, then there is a whole mass of India which has already moved past, as you said. A lot of rural India, has really been, luckily for us untouched, whether it is because of vaccinations in the country, whether it is because of poorer hygiene, whether it is because of more hardy genetic stock. I don't know the answer. But the fact is that outside of the 4 or 5 big cities, India has really gone past COVID already. Right? If you live in small town India, everything is back to normal. So there, I don't expect that the vaccine will make any difference. A lot of people may not even need vaccines. But if you look at Bombay, Delhi, Chennai, Bangalore, you know, these are places where at least the top tier of people are all sitting at home, and at some point of time they will take a vaccine and then they'll go forth and go back to their normal lives, which is important for the economy to get back on track completely. So in that sense, I think a vaccine to the top 10 crore people is really something that is of vital importance. And the second is, of course, all the medical professionals and policemen and retail workers and frontline guys. Uh, Again, we are not a month ago, there were doubts around the vaccine. Now we have enough people who've taken the vaccine and all seems to be fine. Uh, Whether they're actually immune significantly or not, we'll know. But at least prima facie, on the basis of data over the last month, things seem to be going pretty well. And so I think, eventually you and I will also get comfortable with taking a vaccine, take a vaccine and move on with life. And COVID will be behind us, at least for now.
Okay. The next question is from Garvit Sharma, who I think is interning with us. So his question is, how do you think setting up of a DFI will impact financing of infrastructure projects? Do you think it is a good move? And what are your views on the creation of a bad bank during the budget? So Ken, setting up of a DFI, it's not the first time that we've had a development financial institution, or it might have been called something else previously, which has been set up specifically for infrastructure. So what's going to be different this time, according to you? And do you think, as Garvit asked, is it a good move? And what are your views on the creation of a bad bank?
No, I think just with respect to infrastructure, it's not so much the mode as it is the allocation itself, right? It's just the
Right.
fact that there is a very large allocation that's been made to it. So, you know, the mode, we've always done this and we've done this well. India has always had a very, very large state element of its economy. So that I don't think there is any doubts or questions about the mode. It is just about the allocation to it, and the allocation is such a whopper of an allocation that it's caused impact. And the second part, sorry, I missed the second part of the question.
The bad bank, the fact that there will be a bad bank which is going to be set up.
No, I think the bad bank is really something that is required in order to jumpstart and kick the uh, basically ignite life into the entire financial sector that ever since ILNFS about 3 years ago has just been stuck and not moving. So ILNFS, Nirav Modi, like a whole bunch of things have happened. And of course, the bad bank is not something that you can do. What is a bad bank? Let's just simplify life and what is a bad bank, right? Forget about all the nomenclature. Let's just look at, wherever you live in India, there would be a mall or there would be a building that got stuck, right? It's half built and now the developer has run out of money and so he's not able to do anything with it. The bank has given a loan against it. That is not going anywhere. With every passing day, that building that is semi-finished is accumulating more interest and in real life becoming worse and worse and worse.
Right.
And as we pass that building every day, we say, hey, how can this wonderful piece of land that's occupied by this semi-finished building be just stuck in the middle of nowhere, right? Surely there has to be some money that someone can make off it. Well, nobody can because it requires some of the people who have invested earlier to write it off first.
Correct.
Right? If you say that I've given 100 crores loan against this building and I will not settle for anything unless you give me all 100 crores back, you will not be able to kind of ever do anything with the building because maybe today the value of that has dropped and today it's only worth 80 crores. So who's going to pay 100 crores to buy something that's only worth 80 crores? So, however, the moment someone is willing to write it off, the moment you allow it to fail, the moment you allow a bank to write it off its books and you sell it to someone at a NPA cost, whatever that cost might be, and say that zero se to better hai, 25 crore aaj mil jaye mere ko, nahi to zero forever and ever is worth nothing. Then you kickstart that again, right? And that is exactly what they're trying to do with the bad bank. A regular bank will never have the ability to write off. So what they're going to do is they're going to transfer this into one bad bank where essentially all the bad assets sit. And then that bank has a bunch of specialists, which are called asset reconstruction companies, who will figure out how to extract whatever is possible to extract, even if it means taking a loss, but to extract some economic value out of it and to ensure that you can get something going with that building, with that plant, with that project, with that building, with that car, whatever it is. So that's really what a bad bank is. It's like saying, let me take all the bad out of your books because you don't know how to handle it. Now you go and do what you're supposed to do, and I will figure out how to clean all this up. And which is why it is powerful because our entire financial sector has pretty much been passive for the last 2.5 years.
Right. Okay. So, we've obviously already overshot time, but we'll take a last couple of questions. Pratik Batham has asked, do you think that strategic disinvestment in public sector enterprises will adversely affect India in the long run? I think Pratik, Ken has already answered this question on privatization. By the way, for everybody who's listening to this, this is the first budget where the word privatization has been used instead of disinvestment, which is a clear indication that the government is very clear about what it wants to do and is not shy of actually privatizing things. So Pratik, I think that has been answered earlier by Ken. Ken, do you want to add anything to that?
No, nothing very significant except to say that, this is another example of what I talked about earlier. It's in how you say it rather than what you say. Maybe privatization and disinvestment may sound exactly the same, but in one term, when you say privatization, you're clearly saying, I as the government will stay away and I'll just give this over to the private sector and not just, sell some part of it to raise capital. But this is exactly an example of how words are very powerful. You see a lot of excitement around this fact that privatization has officially been used in the budget for the first time. And it's exactly this. I think to Pratik's point, he said strategic disinvestment. I think it's important that you disinvest from all sectors except the strategic ones. So, you can't leave roads and say that road to koi na koi banai dega. You can't say education somebody will do because education is something that pays off in 20 years, right? Anything that is 20, 25 years, look at making, high-speed railways, airports, all of these things are things that the government will have to do, and there you can't afford to privatize or wish it away. But if it's something that's non-core, by all means, I think privatization will just improve things. It will also free up bandwidth for the government to do, what it's supposed to do. All of us know that there used to be a company called HMT. They used to make digital wrist. They used to make wristwatches, right? I mean, the government has no business making wristwatches. Koi na koi bana dega. Let's do more important stuff, and that's really what privatization and a lot of this will do for the country.
Okay. Final question for the day, and we'll wrap up by Siddharth Singh. Which industry do you think this budget will affect the most in a positive way and a negative way? So I think we spoke again a lot about this, but any final words around this? I mean, healthcare spend is up 137%. Capital expenditure is up more than 30%.
No, I think Atmanirbhar Bharat, this is really the first budget where, Atmanirbhar has really seen a big push in terms of actual money being put on the table.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Ken, for doing this with us and with the community. I hope a lot of you've got a lot of pointers, not just for investing and for understanding the budget, but also to answer in your interviews. Clearly, Ken is quite optimistic about the future of India, based on what he's heard and read from the budget. And I would say that I would kind of echo his sentiments and views as well. We are both, I think, long-term India bulls, and we hope that everybody shares the optimism, because if everybody in India really does their job well in a clean, transparent manner, I think there is nothing that can stop us. And we've got great bench strength, as the last month's India-Australia series has shown us, and the Prime Minister spoke about it, Nirmala Sitharaman spoke about it, Ken spoke about it today. So I think it's become a great symbolic inspiration for all of us. So I hope you guys have had a good time today. We'll come back soon with a similar kind of a session. We'll take up something interesting again with Ken or somebody else. So thank you so much for joining us. Bye.
Thank you, Ankit, for having me. Good night, everyone.